When you're a pastor, sometimes you're given the privilege of being present in people's lives at times of intense crisis. And I think the right word there is privilege. Even though the moments may be painful, it's an honor that I'm allowed to be part of those moments, to care for people through them. The first time I realized how big of a privilege it was when I was doing my CPE, when I was being a chaplain at a hospital. And a baby came into the emergency room, maybe 6 weeks old, with a heart rate over 200 beats per minute. And there was this crowd around the emergency table, doctors and nurses and everyone else doing all this work. And over a little bit of distance away, trying to see but unable to get close, was the mom, standing there by herself. She was helpless to do anything. She couldn't even hold her baby's hand because there's not enough room for everyone to get in there and do their work that they need to do and for her to be present at the same time. She had to stand back. There was nothing I could say or do that would make this situation better. So I simply put my hand on her shoulder and stood there with her. I stood there beside her. I don't know. It felt like an hour, 2 hours. Might have been 20 minutes, might have been 40 minutes. I really don't know how long we were there. We just stood there and watched and waited. And I prayed silently, and we hoped that this baby would make it. Eventually, the doctors were able to get the baby's heart rate back down to a normal range, to get things where they should be. And when they finally said, "We're out of the woods," the woman turned to me and just cried. She'd been holding it all in till that moment, and she turned to me and she wrapped her arms around me and she cried. And she thanked me for being there with her. Simon has been on a roller coaster of emotions like that. 6 days ago, Jesus asked what people were saying about him. The other disciples said a lot of various things. Then Jesus asked what they were saying about him. And Simon said, "You are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus praised him, giving him a new name, "Wonderful, God revealed this truth to you. From now on, I will call you Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Now that's some praise, a revelation, a new name, a promise. And then Jesus began talking about what was going to happen next. He's realized it's time to go to Jerusalem, the holy city. And when he gets there, it's not going to be pretty. People who have problems with him rule this city. And he knows his presence will not be appreciated. He tells his disciples, "We're going to Jerusalem, and when we get there, the leaders are going to kill me. And then after 3 days, I will rise again." And the newly ordained Peter isn't having any of it. "No," he interrupts. "No," he shouts. "God forbid it." You can understand Peter's objection. But Jesus is also having none of it. He turns to the rock on which he's going to build his church and says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." Satan, the rock, has become the devil. "Get behind me, Satan. You are in my way, and I will not have you tripping me up." Can you imagine what Simon Peter is feeling at this moment? Even after 6 days, I imagine he's still reeling. And now they're up on the mountain. And again, Peter's on a roller coaster of emotions: awe, wonder, terror, fear, joy. Who knows what he's feeling? I imagine he's trying to make up for the failure of last week. He's trying to show Jesus that he's on board. Lord, let me prove my commitment to you. Or maybe he's thinking to himself, yes, this is it. This is it. I don't know what all that death stuff was about, but this is exactly what I've been hoping for. Let's stay here in this moment. Lord, let me build up some pop-up dwellings, one for each of you, so that we can stay up here for 40 days, 40 nights, and hold on to this. But then that voice, this is my son. Listen to him. Why? Because Peter's not listening? Because Peter doesn't want to hear about the death thing? Because Peter's too excited? Because Peter doesn't get it? Why? Whatever the reason, all the emotions of today and this week and this year overwhelm Peter, and he falls down in terror. There's nothing he can do. Like that woman with her baby, Peter has nothing left. He's frozen. But then there's a hand on his shoulder, like the hand of a parent when a child is waking up from a nightmare, like the hand of a friend when we've fallen down in a race, like the hand of a coach when we think there's no hope, like the hand of a neighbor when we're filled with grief, like the hand of anyone when overwhelmed by the moment and we need to know that someone is with us, will be with us, will help us. In the ALCA, we say God's work, our hands. I discovered what a privilege it was to be a pastor in that moment because I found out that somehow I was the hand of God for this woman. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never been in a situation remotely like that. I was as helpless as she was. I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a nurse. There's nothing I could have done to fix the problem. All I could do was stand there with her. But in doing so, I became the presence of God holding her while it seemed like the world was crumbling around her. I imagine that's what Peter felt at this moment. There was a hand on his shoulder, God's hand, and a peace that surpasses all understanding filled his soul, a peace he hadn't known all week, the peace of Christ. When Jesus placed his hand on, when has Jesus placed his hand on your shoulder and said to you, do not be afraid? Was it at baptism when he gently washed you clean and named you beloved? Was it at communion when he handed you the bread of life? We talked a lot about communion yesterday with the kids. We talked about how this bread and this wine is a promise that God forgives us. That no matter if we've done something so bad we ought to be called Satan, with this food, we are reminded God forgives us. And where there is forgiveness, there is love. This meal is a sign of God's love for us, a reminder that forgiveness means welcome and inclusion. And that because of that, this food not only nourishes our body, it nourishes our hearts and our souls. It fills us with peace and joy. It makes us giddy and even gives us some laughter. And all this happens because we trust that Jesus is present in this meal, in this bread, in this wine, at this table right beside us. Is this meal the hand of God, gently reminding us every week, don't be afraid. I'm right here with you. I don't think it's just the sacraments, even though those are powerful signs. It's also those times when I've doubted my future, my mom has reminded me that God has a plan and will guide me. It's those moments when we are doing our best, but our best seems so small compared to the situation as to be practically pointless. And all we can say is, Jesus, take the wheel. It's those times when our life is turned upside down and the community makes us dinner twice a week for 6 months straight, staying beside us until we're able to get back on our feet. It's Lutheran disaster response, which is there right after the flood, working with the emergency crews, which is there a month after the flood, after the emergency crews have gone and the Red Cross and other teams have stepped in. It's there working right beside them. It's there 6 months after the flood, when the Red Cross is now packing up to move on to somewhere else, and they are saying, we're going to stay. And Lutheran disaster response is there 5 years after the flood, continuing to help until we are able to get back up on our feet, saying to us, do not be afraid, I'm right beside you. I don't think Jesus came to earth just to comfort Peter in his confusion. What we see Jesus do in his earthly ministry is not disconnected from what Jesus does in his heavenly ministry today. Jesus comes to us to do the same thing he did for Peter in our confusion, in our fear, in our sorrow, in our overwhelmedness, to lay his hand on our shoulders and say, do not be afraid. Get up, I am with you. To be with us each day, in the big things and the small things, to remind us not to fear, to show us love, to help us when we fall down, to lead us to that good life that the psalmist promises. When have you had Jesus show up in your life and lay his hand on you, saying, don't be afraid, I've got you. You are loved. Now stand up and live. Amen.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like if you heard good news and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest message. Peace be with you.